Hey folks, my name's Greg. You might be wondering, what's this weird internet dude doing out in the dark talking to a selfie stick? And I'll tell you, I'm here to show you about a new construction material for hills. It's not new, but it might be new to you, and that is pine bark. You find it in the mulch section of the local hardware store. See if we can get a better thing. And we are going to be making some stylized shale hills out of this stuff, because this is going to look like slate rock. And I probably could have just brought this inside. Okay, people, in the next 20 minutes, let's knock this thing out. So, we've got our pine bark. So we're going to begin the process by just laying down some foam that's going to be the general subterrane of the hill. Then, all you are going to do is take the choicest bits of pine bark you can find and start trying to come up with a general idea of how this is going to go. Stack them up. Play Tetris, do what you need to do to get the look you're going for. This one's going to be an oblong, slightly rectangular hill for arbitrary reasons. It's just what came out. Once you have all your pieces in place, I don't recommend you taking anything off except the very top pieces, and I recommend you glue them down, top down. Otherwise, if you take everything off and start to build it back up, it's going to be really difficult to recreate the look that you like. And it's actually pretty easy. You can just lift it up, put the hot glue in there, shove the hot glue in between the foam and the pine bark, squeeze the trigger, should be good to go. Alright, once everything's in place, I'm going to leave the top undone for right now. I'm not really sure why, it just seemed like the right idea at the time. You're going to see that there's a number of gaps in between these bigger pieces of pine bark. You can see the foam through them. That's a no-go. So I'm going to come back, cut up some workable pieces of pine bark with a hobby knife. They're really easy to cut. And dry fit those cut up pieces into some of the gaps and glue them in. And you just keep placing pine bark wherever it needs to go. You're going to see hot glue, perhaps hot glue strands. That's fine. We're going to cover up the hot glue later. Just make sure it's not absolutely egregious, like slopping off the side of the hill, and you should be good to go. Now, once all the gaps are filled up, I'm going to put the top on. Now, I personally like the look of having the same texture on the top as on the sides, but you can make it completely flat using Sculpt-A-Mold or wall filler, and then just put a different sort of ground cover on that. I'm also going to place pine bark around the outside of the hill and the surrounding ground cover, because I've found that it's kind of stark if this hill just pops up out of nowhere. You kind of want it to transition from lower lying slate rock into the rock feature itself. You don't have to do this, it's just my personal recommendation based on what I think looks good. But build this for you. Okay, now, because of rank incompetence, I lost the footage to the next part, so I'm going to make a small piece of scatter. What we're going to do is take these little shavings of plaster, and how I got these was I just, over the course of a few weeks and a lot of casting of rock molds, I saved up all my little scrap overpour plaster pieces, and they actually are thin and they make really good small bits of shale. They can be kind of untextured and sharp along the edges, so I'm putting it into a box of rocks and just tub of rocks and just shaking it up to break off like any right angles, anything that looks too symmetrical. It also is going to apply a little bit of texture to the face of these little rocks. So, to build up years and years and centuries of erosion and dirt and stuff like that, we're going to make some more horrendous texture paste, which I also used to build the mesa in episode 3. And we're going to do that by using spackling, or wall filler, mixing in some watered down PVA glue to make it workable, adding construction sand to give it a kind of dirty finish, and then I'm going to start taking a sander or a strainer and adding the smallest bits of overpour plaster shards. And once I get the consistency I like, I start adding larger pieces, more sand, more overpour pieces, more sand. You get the idea. Until you get a texture and consistency that you like. There's no exact ratios, as long as you take it out on a popsicle stir or whatever you're using and it holds its shape. That's what you want. Wet but holding its shape so that it's workable with a brush. And I'm just globbing it on wherever I think it will look good, whatever gaps, if there's hot glue, that's where you put it. Taking a wet brush and blending it in to the hill. Once it's blent to an acceptable degree, Once it's blended to an acceptable degree, I'm taking more of these bits of shale and just pressing them in to express more depth so that there's slate rocks or shale rocks lying on top. Alright, we're back to the old footage now. And I'm doing the same thing on the larger feature. Now, you don't need to just put these into the area where the spackling's covering. No, you can just lay these out however you want, all along the hill, all over the pine bark. I'm definitely going for a really littered look on this, so putting it in a lot of areas. I'm sprinkling these shale bits in between pieces of pine bark on the sides of the hill, so there's buildup there as well over the surrounding ground. When there's a deposit of shale, it's everywhere. You can also add larger bits of cut up pine bark for just larger, more textured pieces. Then, to affix everything in place, I'm getting some Mod Podge, slightly watered down, and taking a pipette, adding some ISO so it flows a little bit better. That's isopropanol alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and drizzling it all over the place. Alternatively, you can also add a little bit of paint to this mixture so that as it goes on, you can see where you've already placed it so you don't miss any areas. Now, after this point, they're not going to be completely stable. They're not going to be war game ready. So we're going to the next step. After that's dried for quite a while, I'm going to mix up Mod Podge and a dark gray paint and kind of adapting the old school method of putting paint in your PVA to save yourself a painting step. And I'm basically stippling that all over the place. The Mod Podge will affix all these loose little rocks into place and also give you a pretty good base coat. It looks more gray than it will actually be. It's going to dry darker. It's going to be far darker than this. Make sure you don't forget to tilt the board up or your scatter piece and get in between all those pine bark crevices on the sides. Now, once that's dry, this is what you'll have. As you can see, I painted this Mod Podge all over the place, and that's because I'm going to spray paint it. Mod Podge has varnish in it and will protect the foam from the accelerant or the propellant in the spray paint. I'm using Satin Granite by Rust-Oleum, and I'm kind of spraying this in a zenithal fashion, coming in with a gray at a 60-degree angle, doing my first coat, and then coming in with a white and just spraying the top from a distance, giving it a small frosting. Then, after that's dried, hitting it with a dark wash. This is homemade wash. Don't use your model washes. You just won't have enough, and it's just a bad idea in general. I made this by mixing Liquitex matte medium, Liquitex Flow Aid, distilled water, and some black acrylic ink. And I'm applying it with a dollar store makeup brush. I don't know what kind of brush this is called. You can get it at the dollar store, and this is what I use for shading large areas. You just rub it back and forth, and it really stops it from pooling in all sorts of places, which is great. And the coverage is awesome. Next, I'm going to get kind of a steely gray color, kind of a mid to light gray. And on another dollar store makeup contour brush, I am going to start doing a pretty heavy highlight of the satin granite spray paint. Primed friggin' layer. After that coat's done, after I've worked my way across the entire feature, I'm taking Apple Barrel Antique Parchment, which is an off-white, and doing the lightest dry brush I've done in a long time. I tested on cardboard first to make sure it's not on there too thick, and I just brush upwards, never side to side because I don't want to fill in those strata lines, and just pick out the most extreme details on the rock. Now, you can add a lot of different colors of paint to this, but I kind of wanted it to be more sci-fi, so it's just one color, different shades of gray. It kind of gives you a moon rock look when you do that on pine bark, which I like. When that's done, it's time to put your grit layer on. And that is going to be sand and tile grout. Because there's a lot of places I don't want to cover it with sand, I'm using a small shot glass and a strainer to kind of control the pour and my aim. I decided that I'm very happy with the contrast between the color of the sand and the slate rock, or shale hill. I think it looks pretty cool. So cover that up, then hit your sand tile grout mixture with some watered down isopropanol. I'm using a 50-50 water to iso mixture. And if you don't know, this acts as a flow aid. Tile grout kind of can resist water and bead up, but the iso forestalls that happening. And then I'm just hitting it with scenic glue, which for this I'm using 1 part scenic glue, 1 part Mod Podge, 3 parts water, drop of dish soap. Oh yeah. And just let that dry. Add your vegetation to taste.